the 2025 local indicator process. Um, this is one of our ongoing webinars in the Tuesday at 2 series. And this week we've got the local indicator process and then the goals and actions on Thursday at 3. The purpose of today's webinar is to talk about the state's accountability system really briefly, to review the local indicator performance standards and reporting requirements, and to review the connection between the local indicators and the LCAP, which is really the purpose of why we're doing this webinar now. Because as we'll get into more, the local indicators are really intended to help inform the review and the update of the goals within the LCAP, as well as inform planning and decision making moving forward. And so we'll do that, and we'll also look at an example of the local indicator data and how to use that to inform the LCAP. So the intended audience for this presentation is pretty much anybody that's involved within the local indicator process or involved within the LCAP. So it could be pretty much anybody out there. And so let's start with talking about California's accountability system. If you remember back to the inception of LCFF, one of the foundational principles of LCFF was that the accountability system be based on multiple measures. There was a real desire to get away from the single number in terms of accountability and look at a more well-rounded accountability system. And so statute required the State Board of Education to develop evaluation rubrics that were to assist school districts in evaluating their strengths and weaknesses and areas of improvement, and to assist LEAs identified in need of technical assistance around what focus areas what areas they should be focusing on. And so, you know, if we remember the 10 state priorities, 8 for school districts and county offices of education, and 10 for county offices of education, 8 for school districts and charter schools. If you remember these priorities, the State Board of Education developed the accountability system based on whether or not there were available statewide data collections. And so performance data that's collected in a standardized way at the state level was what was used to identify state indicators within the California School Dashboard. And the remaining indicators from the 10 state priorities, or 8 or 10 state priorities, that used local data were what the local indicators were based off of. So at this point in time, we have this kind of hybrid system looking at both, you know, state collect standardized data and then locally reported data that's not standardized. In terms of the 2024 dashboard, LEAs are going to use the 2024 dashboard in order to inform the development of the 2025-26 LCAP. And as you're probably already aware, our colleagues over in the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division have put together a dashboard communication toolkit aimed at helping to navigate the 2024 dashboard, which was released prior to Thanksgiving break. So in terms of the local control and accountability plan, just, you know, grounding ourselves again, the LCAP is required as part of the local control funding formula. All LEAs, whether that's school districts, county offices of education, or charter schools, are required to develop, adopt, and annually update the 3-year LCAP. using the template that's adopted by the State Board of Education. And so annually, LEAs go through this process where they look at the data that's coming in from both the state level and at the local level. They collect input from their educational partners, and they reflect on state and local data that's reported through the dashboard, as well as any other local data that they want to include. All of that is intended to inform the LCAP. And so when we're talking about this local indicator process, we're going to get into talking about how local data is intended to inform that development process, and then how that is then going to be used in terms of the in informing the LCAP. So let's talk specifically about local indicators. The local indicators, as has already been mentioned, are for those indicators, those state priorities where there is not state level data that's available. The State Board of Education adopted these local indicators in order to address those state priorities within the California School Dashboard. These local indicators apply to all LEAs, and they don't apply to individual schools, which is why when you look on the dashboard, you might see some state level indicators for schools, but you don't see local indicators for schools the same way that you do for LEAs. As we've already mentioned, the local indicators apply to certain state priorities where there is not standardized state level data. Those include priority 1, basic conditions of learning; priority 2, implementation of state academic content and performance standards; priority 3, parent involvement and family engagement; priority 6, specifically around the school climate surveys and the sense of connectedness and safety that are there; priority 7 in terms of access to broad course of study; and then for county offices of education, priorities 9 and 10, the coordination of services for expelled youth and coordination of services for foster youth. And so those constitute the local indicator areas. In terms of the performance standards, the State Board of Education adopted the following 3 performance standards for all of the local indicators. And so the 3 performance standards are that: 1, an LEA annually measure its progress in meeting the requirements for the specific LCFF priority. 2, that they report those results as part of a non-consent item at the same public meeting of the governing board or body of the LEA at which the LCAP is adopted. And 3rd, that they report the results to the public using the approved self-reflection tools for the particular local indicator. If an LEA accomplishes all 3 of these things for each of the local indicators, it receives a designation of met or standard met on the dashboard for those local indicators. If the LEA does not address all 3 of these criteria, then the LEA receives a not met. And if the LEA receives 2 not mets in a row, then it'll be not met for 2 or more years. And this is just a slide covering what I just said. You can have multiple years of being at not met for 2 or more years. Being identified as not met for 2 or more years is one of the, or is potentially a criteria that identifies an LEA as being eligible for differentiated assistance. And so it's something that is easy for LEAs to be able to address. Now, in terms of what it means to annually measure progress, in terms of those required performance standards. Um, each year, the LEA needs to annually measure its progress, and so it needs to look at how the LEA is doing in terms of implementation related to each of the particular local indicator areas. They need to look at the local indicator self-reflection tools, become familiar with what those are asking for, and then identify the data that they're going to use in order to support that. At this point in time, most, if not all, LEAs should have determined what data they're going to use. That should be data that they're already, starting to look at and to determine how that implementation has been going. So we're in the analyze data phase. And then you're going to use those findings in order to report progress through those state board adopted self-reflection tools in order to determine the need and to inform the planning within the LCAP. The self-reflection tools that have been adopted by the State Board of Education vary from one priority to another. In certain priorities, it's an open-ended response where you're asked to reflect on the implementation related to a particular standard. In other instances, it's asking for a for the LEA to provide a Likert scale rating. Sometimes it's a choice, and the LEA can do one or the other. And what those look like is available within the local indicator self-reflection tools on the local indicator webpage. The quick guide lists all of the local indicators, and then we've got each local indicator available individually if you're just looking for a particular one. Then comes the reporting phase, and when you're doing your reporting, remember that reporting to the local board needs to be done as part of a non-consent item at the same public meeting at which the LCAP is adopted. And the LCAP, of course, has to be adopted on or before July 1st of each year. Therefore, the local indicators needs to be reported on or before July 1st of each year. That's part of the reason why within the dashboard, when you're uploading the local indicators, it asks for when you presented those to the governing board, is to ensure that was done at the same meeting at which the LCAP was adopted. That when those are uploaded to the dashboard, those then appear on the dashboard for the coming year. So the current local indicators that are on the 2024 dashboard, those were uploaded in June and July of this past year. Similarly speaking, coming up in 2025, the local indicator reporting window will be open in June and July again. Those local indicators that are reported in June or July of 2025 will inform the 2025 dashboard. And so, the work on the local indicators is taking place now. The presentation will take place, sometime in May, June, July, generally speaking, depending on the LEA. You can report your local indicators to the dashboard right after that's been adopted, get those uploaded, and hopefully that's a smooth transition for you in getting those uploaded for the 2025 dashboard. Again, we're here during this period of time during fall through spring where we're gathering and analyzing the data and using that to evaluate the implementation of those local indicator areas, potentially, starting on developing those responses. Then on or before July 1st, of 2025, reporting those local indicators to the governing board at the same meeting that the LCAP is adopted. And then in June and July, the dashboard coordinator will be uploading those local indicators to the dashboard for 2025. Just a word here about dashboard coordinators. Prior to being able to report to the dashboard, the LEA, most LEAs are going to designate a dashboard coordinator. By default, all superintendents and charter school administrators are automatically identified as I'm suddenly blanking on the word, as being the person in charge basically of the dashboard. They have the same ability to upload things as a dashboard coordinator does. But for the majority of LEAs, thank you, Susan, the main authorizer, superintendents and charter school administrators are identified as the main authorizer. The main authorizer is the one that identifies and approves the dashboard coordinators. An LEA can also identify an alternate authorizer in addition to the main authorizer. That alternate authorizer is somebody that the main authorizer also has to identify. So if you've got a main authorizer, if you've got an alternate authorizer, if you've got a dashboard coordinator, any of those three roles can upload the local indicators to the dashboard using the MyCDE Connect system. For a lot of LEAs, that's not going to be the superintendent of the LEA that's doing that uploading. They're going to identify either an alternate authorizer or a dashboard coordinator that will then upload those local indicators to the dashboard in June and July, and that's there. The dashboard coordinator does have to be approved by the main authorizer prior to being able to upload that information. The role of the dashboard coordinator is to upload the local indicator information. They also upload the LCAP to the dashboard when that window opens up in October. And they're also the ones that are responsible for going in and checking information for accuracy and looking at the information during the private preview window that's open before the dashboard goes public. Dashboard coordinators can also at any point in time go in and update the optional narrative that's provided. And so that optional narrative is available year round. If there's something that the LEA wants to highlight or identify for their constituents within the dashboard, they can use that optional narrative box in order to highlight that's there. They can also add hyperlinks to other reports if there's not enough information, not enough space to provide those within the optional narrative box. So let's talk about the information around how the local indicators inform the LCAP. So when you're considering your local data, it's important to consider how the local data can inform the comprehensive planning process and support the LCAP. That local data is really going to be important because, you know, as we're all aware, a lot of the data that's reported through the dashboard is 1 or 2 years in arrears. So it's not the most recent data that's available. And the local data is going to provide us with more recent data that's really going to help us to be able to make more informed decisions within our LCAP. So in terms of how local indicator data might be used, it could be used in terms of the educational partner engagement process. It could be used in order to support data analysis, in order to support progress monitoring, which would include whether or not actions are effective or ineffective. It informs the identification of successes and needs, or successes and challenges. It informs the goal analysis part of the process that folks will be going through this year. And then it also informs the developments of goals for the LCAP in terms of the descriptions, the why statement, metrics, actions, etc. The areas that local indicator data could potentially inform would be the plan summary, especially like the reflection on the dashboard in that second prompt. The engaging educational partners section, where LEA input within the implementation data for the local indicators might show up. Goals and actions, the goal analysis that's part of the goals and actions, and then also potentially within the increased or improved services section. All of those are areas where local indicator data could intersect with the LCAP. So in terms of an example of how an LEA might use the local indicator process to report progress and inform decision making. When we're talking about this example, it's just an example. It's not exhaustive. It doesn't speak to the local context of each LEA. It's just demonstrating how the information that's collected as part of the process could be used to inform the LEA and its community. So in our example here, we have the first part of the process. We're going to meet with the LEA. We're going to meet with the staff and advisory committees. We're going to familiarize them with the self-reflection tool. And in this case, it's specific to priority 3. So we're looking at parent involvement and family engagement. We're going to review the prior practices, what we've done in terms of the process for engaging families throughout the year. Then we're going to bring in the data, that local data that we've collected throughout the year on the implementation, and look at how that implementation has taken place. We're going to then determine if there are updates to the process that are needed, if there's any additional data that's needed as part of that process. And then if it is needed, we're going to get input from our educational partners on what that data might look like from the appropriate educational partners. We're going to use multiple strategies to collect data, and we're going to make sure that information is accessible. For example, we're going to send surveys in multiple languages to families, teachers, and staff. We're going to meet with the parent advisory committees at the LEA level, potentially also student advisory committee. We're going to talk with school site councils and request input related to how it is that they're helping in terms of implementation of parent involvement and family engagement. And then we're going to provide virtual and in-person learning input opportunities to parents, teachers, and other educational partners, and attend various community events and request input at those as well. Then we're going to review that collected data and determine whether or not we need to dive deeper into the data in order to understand what the findings are. We're going to look at the self-reflection tools and start kind of planning out how it is that we will address that data in terms of the information that's asked for on the self-reflection tool. And then we're going to determine how that information could be used to inform the LCAP, such as does this lead towards any root causes, identify any identified needs, strategies to address needs, etc. And then we're going to report the progress to the local governing board at that meeting at which the LCAP is adopted. Based on the analysis of the data, we're going to identify within priority three. Priority three has two components in the three various areas of priority three. It asks first for the LEA to gauge its implementation based on a 5-point Likert scale, and then it asks the LEA to respond to 3 prompts. So when we're looking at our implementation and looking at how that goes, the 5 ratings are 1, exploration and research, 2, beginning development, 3, initial implementation, 4, full implementation, and 5, full implementation and sustainability. Now, it's important to realize that there are no standardized definitions of what those mean. What initial implementation means to one LEA might be full implementation to another LEA. There's no general standard there. And so it's important for the LEA when they're working with their educational partners and their communities to kind of identify what each of these ratings means so that it's clear to the educational partners within the LEA what each one of these ratings mean and why it's applicable to our LEA in particular and not all LEAs. So in terms of the examples for around building relationships, we're rating our implementation in these 4 particular areas. And as you can see, based on the ratings, we've rated ourselves at either initial implementation or full implementation. So in the mid to higher range, not at the very highest end, not at the very low end. And we're being asked to rate ourselves based on a number of criteria, including creating a welcoming environment and supporting staff in learning about family strengths, cultures, languages, and goals for their children. There are 2 other sections that also ask for this 5-point Likert scale rating. And then in addition to the 5-point Likert scale rating, there are going to be 3 prompts, all of which would be addressing that same theme of building relationships. So within prompt 1, we're asked, based on the analysis of educational partner input and local data, briefly describe the LEA's current strengths and progress in building relationships between school staff and families. And so in our response, we're going to draw on feedback that we've received from educational partners. We're going to identify some of those strengths that have been identified based on conversations with educational partners and data. And we're going to articulate those within this first response. So part of our response here involves that we communicate with families early and often in multiple languages and formats, that we provide multiple opportunities to provide input in a variety of ways. We're providing multiple opportunities to build relationships and partnerships, and that the schools within the district are providing welcoming campuses for families. Then in terms of reflecting on the feedback and data analysis, we're going to identify that the district has improved its engagement practices by providing additional resources to support staff, and that the district has also made significant efforts to honor the contributions, languages, cultures, and needs of both families and staff. And so all of that's integrated within that first prompt, are part of our response to that first prompt. The second prompt is then asking, based on the analysis of educational partner input and local data, briefly describe the LEA's focus areas for improvement in building relationships between school staff and families. So in terms of our example, things that we want to focus on is the time for teachers and families to collaborate in the development of goals, professional learning to continue supporting teachers, and identifying methods to improve engagement with underrepresented families. And then prompt 3, based on the analysis of educational partner input and local data, briefly describe how the LEA will improve engagement of underrepresented families identified during the self-reflection process in relation to building relationships between school staff and families. And so in our example here, we are identifying that we're going to identify those underrepresented families. We're going to contact them, identify potential barriers to engagement and the opportunities to address those barriers. And then we're going to support teachers in maintaining communication with the families, and in improving engagement. Now, when we're talking about these various responses, what the responses look like and the level of detail that goes into them is really going to vary by LEA. It's not necessarily going to look the same from one year to the next. And it's also not going to look the same from one LEA to another LEA. If you have an LEA that's really invested in educational partner engagement and invested within the community, they're already, doing a bunch of things that are involving parents and families, that parents and families are identifying as part of educational partner feedback, that there aren't a lot of barriers, that there are a lot of opportunities, that they feel welcomed, that that they feel heard, and that they're considered part of the process in determining changes and identifying needs and all of that. There's probably going to be far fewer things to talk about in terms of what improvements are needed. On the other hand, if those things aren't going on, then there's going to be a longer response or more information that's necessary in terms of what those improvements might look like. And so just realize that it's going to vary from one LEA to another because it's based on each LEA's unique context. It's not, standardized across all LEAs. So, from one district to another district, even if they're geographically close to each other, there's not an expectation that these responses look the same. In terms of other things that we're going to be looking at, here's an example of the way in which some of our local indicator, the data that we use to inform the local indicators is showing up within the metrics. So we've got the percent, some specific metrics, percent of families attending a family engagement event. This year, remember that we're filling out the year one outcome. We're filling out the current different from baseline. Year two is still not applicable. We've also got the percentage of staff that feel that professional development helps them to build family and school partnerships, and the percent of families that feel that professional development helps them to partner better with the school. And so you can see, between the baseline and the year one outcome, what the difference from baseline is, as well as what the target is. So you can actually see the change over time here in the far column on the right. So that's information that we're, within this example, we're taking from the local indicator process and adding into the plan. And then in terms of specific actions, this information that we've used from our local indicator process, and using that process to identify the successes, the challenges, and that information. We've identified some particular actions that are included in there. Now, there's nothing that says that you have to include actions based on local indicators. It's just one more form of data and one more piece of information that can help to help that LCAP process to be more robust and to provide a more holistic look at what improvement looks like and how it's going. In this particular example, we've got family engagement collaboration. So we've added in a particular action related to this. Going back to the earlier slides around the needs that we've identified, we're putting in this particular action. Also, family engagement, professional development, in terms of incorporating that professional development into monthly staff meetings. And then family and community engagement staff, we're hiring a specific person to do that engagement work at the LEA level, and including that as an action within the plan as well. So those are all ways that we can incorporate that local indicator information and that process into the LCAP. So in terms of reminders, when we're talking about reporting to the local governing board, LEAs are required to report the information to the local governing board at the same meeting at which the LCAP is adopted. The teacher assignment monitoring outcome data that's available, the number and percentage of students without access to their own copies of standard aligned instructional materials, and the number of identified instances where facilities do not meet the good repair standard. If the TAMO data isn't available, or the most recent TAMO data isn't available, you're going to report the data that is available. So in this instance, you're probably going to be reporting the TAMO data that was released in early November, shortly before the release of the dashboard. And that will be the teacher assignment monitoring outcome data that will be presented to the governing board as part of the local indicator process. That teacher assignment monitoring outcome data, just as a reminder, is always 2 years in arrears, because it's got to go to the Commission on Teacher Credentialing and then come back to the department. And so if you're looking for more up-to-date information, like if you have local information, local data that you want to include as a metric within the LCAP, you're welcome to do that in order to provide your educational partners with more of or even yourself as the LEA, with a more up-to-date look at where teacher assignment and monitoring is, since that information is not going to be 2 years old. Just as a reminder, when you're filling out when you're uploading the local indicators to the dashboard, it will ask for the date that those were presented to the local governing board. It is possible to enter a date that occurs after July 1st. Only do that if you have adopted your LCAP after July 1st. Obviously, otherwise, what you want to do is you want to put the date that the LCAP was adopted, which should be the same date that you presented those local indicators to the local governing board or the body. And if you even if you upload all of the local indicators, if you report that date as occurring after July 1st, it's going to, the dashboard system is going to identify that those local indicators are not met because the LCAP was not adopted on or before July 1st in accordance with the law. So just be aware of that. As we get close to wrapping up here, in terms of closing thoughts, we want to encourage you to engage educational partners in the local indicator process. The idea here is not that there's somebody sitting in a room by themselves kind of determining where the LEA is in terms of its implementation. It's intended to be a process that engages the educational partners within the community. It's also intended to reflect on that local data as well. So reflect on those prior practices and the process and the data. That response needs to be based on local data. So even referring to the local indicator data is as part of the response, what data was used as part of that response can be a beneficial thing. Then reviewing those narrative responses to ensure that they address all of the aspects of the required prompts and the instructions for those prompts, and then consider how the local indicator process can inform the LCAP development. If you have any questions for us, you can reach out to us at lcff@cde.ca.gov. We've put some resources for you on the slide deck, so you have those available in terms of the local indicator webpage, the flyers for the local indicators, and frequently asked questions. And we're going to hang around and respond to some questions here before we go. But if you need to hop off, feel free. This is one of the shorter webinars that we have, so you can feel free to head out if you need to. So there's a question in terms of what year is the priority one indicator going to report. So the indicator for priority one, so say for the 2024 dashboard, the teacher assignment monitoring outcome data that's reported on the 2024 dashboard is actually reflective of 2022. The percentage of standards aligned of students without standard aligned instructional materials and the percentage, the number of facilities, the facilities in good repair, both of those would be reporting the data from the prior year. So it's kind of a little bit wonky with priority one because you've got one aspect that's looking at data from 2 years ago and is collected in a standardized way at the state level. But then you've also got information that's collected at the local and reported at the local level. And that's from the prior year. And so that's the how that plays out. And then there's a question in the Q&A around, has there been any conversation or exploration to have the local indicators reviewed and approved by county offices as part of the LCAP approval process or as part of any other review process? No, not at this point in time. That has not been something that the state board has been considering or looking at least to my knowledge. If there's a need, we can put out some additional guidance related to how the local indicator process might be better informed. Yeah, we could potentially do that. What's required to be reported for actions being included and paid with LREBG funds? We will talk about that in the LREBG actions and descriptions webinar on January 14th. We'll briefly touch on it in the webinar on Thursday, talking about goals and actions, but we'll go more in depth at the webinar on January 14th. The self-reflection tools there's a question in here, are the self-reflection tools for internal use? They're not submitted or uploaded to the dashboard. It's both. The self-reflection tools are for internal use, in that you use them to basically develop out your responses. Then when you're reporting the local indicators to the dashboard uses those self-reflection tools as the reporting vehicle. So the information that you enter in on the self-reflection tools and at the internal level is what you're reporting on the dashboard. What's reported on the dashboard is the same as what shows up in the self-reflection tools. It's just the self-reflection tools, you can, since they're Word document templates, you can basically just plug in a bunch of information and format your responses and get them dialed in terms of getting all of the data dumped in there and everything else. And then use that to then streamline that what's being reported to the dashboard. There's a question in the chat about if we had a Williams visit this year, would we report it as a year one outcome? Not necessarily, unless you have a metric in the LCAP that is related to the Williams visit. So if you've got a metric in the LCAP, it would be part of the year one outcome. Otherwise, the outcome of Williams would be reported kind of, well, one, it's going to be reported within the SARCs, but then two, it's also going to be potentially reported in a very truncated manner within the local indicator. Where can we find recordings? Those are posted on the Tuesday at 2 webpage. If you need them sooner, you can email us, and we can probably send you the recording prior to it getting posted. But we try to get those turned around and posted. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So with that, we'll go ahead and bid you good day. Thank you all for your time and for being here with us and for everything that you do for your LEAs. So thank you very much and have a good afternoon.